It's the Dearly Departed podcast, featuring your hosts, historian Scott Michaels and filmmaker Mike Dorsey.
All right, everybody, welcome. It's Dearly Departed podcast. I believe this is episode 27, so we made it to the 27 club, Scott.
Hooray! We're one of the few that are get out of it, right? Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Hopefully, yes.
Not good.
Yeah,
we don't want to be a subject for someone else's podcast, do we?
Right. No, the tragic end of the Dearly Departed podcast. Next on
That's going to haunt me. One day that's going to happen and people are going to laugh. So, hopefully not for a while, but they're going to go, it's about damn time I caught up to him.
I'll make sure that whatever tour is in your area puts your house on the route in your honor, okay? So we just recorded our Patreon show where we went over all the folks that have passed away in the couple months since we did our last episode back in early March. And so that's on our Patreon. So if you head over there and support us, you can listen for as little as $2 a month. And
that's like a almost an hour long show today that we did. For
it is
the Patreon page. So yeah. All the obituaries, not all of them, but most of them, and lots of weird off-the-cuff stories, which is what you guys seem to like. So yeah.
What's happening in the world today? We talked about this a little on our Patreon, but you went on a road trip, a big cross-country one.
Yeah. I went to Florida 2 times, and one time I went over. We flew over to. Spend a little bit of time with my family, and then the second time I drove over with my friend Jordan, who his YouTube channel Jordan the Lion. He ended up relocating, and we drove with his dog across the country, doing lots of odd little stops on the way and making videos. So it was a lot of fun. We stopped in a lot of different places, so many places that it's like I can't remember because it's so overwhelming, but it was a lot of fun. That's the first time I went. I just uploaded a video onto YouTube on the Wallendas, the flying Wallendas, who are like a weird obsession of buying a family of acrobats, and I was able to find their home where they lived and their grave where they're all buried. And since their big accident happened in Detroit, where I'm from, where 2 of the members were killed when they fell off the high wire, my video is devoted to those 2. But the Wallendas are incredible performers, artists. I mean, it's watching them is just it's nerve shattering to watch these. Now they make it more safety because so many of them have died. At least 4 of them have died from falls, including the patriarch, Carl Wallenda, who famously, you could see it on YouTube, was in San Juan, this little old man, he's like 75 or something, and doing the teeter, and boom. And it was all recorded, and it's all on YouTube. It's so sad. But that's the life of an acrobat. When they were an artist like that, when they did the thing in Detroit, 2 of the members died. One of them was paralyzed, and the other girl had severe head injuries, and they went on the next day. The rest of the family did. It's just
wow. The show must go on, I guess, huh?
Yeah. So I love the Wallendas, and then there's I did a thing on Grady Styles, who was the lobster boy, who he was born with that condition where Ethan. What's his face in American Horror Story when they did Freak Show did a thing where he had the hands, they were like pinchers. I could think of, there's a word for that. I forget what it is. But anyway, he was a miserable human being, Grady Styles. And we're going to talk about that. We talked about doing the Freak Show stuff in a future episode. So,
but he was involved in a murder, correct?
Right. Well, yeah, he was involved in a murder, and then they convicted him, but they couldn't put him anywhere because they know what to do with them. He's a man with 2 arms and 2 legs, but pinchers on both. So they sent a house arrest, and he ended up being murdered. He was a hateful man. And
we should do a Freaks episode for sure. Yeah.
I learned a lot of stuff when I was in Gibsonton, where that was their sort of summer or off-season home. And we mentioned, a little while back on the other podcast, talking about we stopped at the J. Mansfield crash location, and we stopped at the Alamo, and we did the Big Bopper's grave, and we did some really interesting things because Jordan did a couple of things he wanted to do. I did the things I wanted to do, mostly the James Dean stuff in Marfa, Texas, where they filmed Giant. So it's just a really fun trip, and you're always taking a risk when you're traveling with somebody because it's like, how's this going to go? It could go after an hour, you know if it's going to go, belly up or anything. But it was great. It was great fun. So we had fun.
And you went to the Jane Mansfield crash site outside New Orleans.
Right.
Had you been there before though, right?
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, we spent New Year's Eve. We rang in the New Year like 3 years ago at the crash site.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really quite emotional for me to be there, and it sounds so dramatic, but so much of our life since we have the car that she was killed in, it involves her. Now we're sort of a reference point, and people are always sending me Jane Mansfield stuff, and I read more about her. And so when you're there, all of a sudden you're in the dark. It's about midnight around the time the accident happened, and we're standing there, and it's overwhelming, because it's such a, like I say, a huge part of our lives, Troy and I, and of Dearly Departed. So it was something. And I just interviewed, who I interviewed was the woman who was the fiance of the driver, Ronnie Harrison.
Oh, wow. And, he was a young man, too.
Yeah, they were engaged. And actually, she was pregnant when the accident happened, and none of her family knew that. And she had a really interesting story. And, it's a bit of trivia. Her son is the kid, and you probably know this, a lot of other people probably wouldn't, who redid Raiders of the Lost Ark shot by shot by shot. Do you remember that story?
I didn't realize that there was a relation. No, I had no idea, but I've seen the documentary that they made about that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like the greatest fan film ever made or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, well, over a period of like 5 summers, these kids remade like well. I mean, they did it well, and shot by shot. In fact, Spielberg saw it and like had them in for a meeting or something, I think. So it's pretty interesting. So yeah, she's got some really wild stories. So that'll be an interesting thing to hear one day.
That's interesting, too, because Spielberg, that's when he made movies like that when he was a kid. That's how he got into it. He had a camera, and he was a teenager. He started, or maybe even before, he started making war movies and stuff with his little friends. And that was so. You can see how he has a soft spot probably for other people that kind of do that, the fan films and stuff like that. Yeah,
but it was done well. You keep waiting. When's the big ball going to happen? It's going to look really dumb. And it was like they did a really good job with that.
And they blew up the plane, or they did like the plane explosion scene while he's running away. That was like one of the last things they shot because they never had the budget to do a big explosion.
I think they finished it like when they were in their 20s or something. They did that shot to complete the whole thing. But it was really clever, really, really an odd, cool idea.
I saw you posted this. The Full House creator, Jeff Franklin, who created the Full House television series, and is a big TV producer. He owns the Cielo Drive location now, the address, the plot of land where the Tate murders happened, and built a huge mega mansion on the property now. It seems to take up the entire property, is this giant house. And he's just listed it. You can now rent the house for a steal at $250,000 a month.
And there you are. When Sharon and Roman moved in, it was $1,200 a month, I think. But it was a different house. But I mean, it's a complicated house because it was, Altabelli, who owned the house and was renting it to Sharon and Roman, lived in the house for a good 20 years. He started renting it out to people. The last person was Trent Reznor. He moved out, sold it to brothers, Weintraub brothers. And the Weintraub brothers were going to make a fortune. And they tore down the house. And they left one wall. There's still a kitchen wall up there and a tree from the original house. But they were going to make a fortune and build this house. It was called Villa Bella. And then he bought it. Franklin spent another probably 3 years finishing it off. And it's just this behemoth on the hill. It's this massive 17,000 square foot house. The Tate House was, it wasn't small either, but it was modest, certainly by those standards. And it's interesting because the house that's being built above his is even more insane. And they've been building that for at least 5 years, and they haven't even started. They're just building the foundation for 5 years. So the house I think part of the reason Jeff Franklin is leaving that house and renting it out is because there's a ridiculous house being built above his. So, it's something. It's something, man. That is when people just don't tell you to stop. There's nobody going, no, we're not going to let that happen.
Right.
There's that. Well, they did do that, didn't they, in Bel Air really recently? That guy built that house.
Yeah, and they kept telling him, you can't do it, and he kept going forward, and finally they put their foot down.
And they made him tear it down.
I think they're going to make them tear it down. Yeah,
it's got to go.
It seems like that almost never actually happens. The developers have so much more power, and eventually they went
just
out.
Throw a little bit more money at them, I mean, look at what happened at Target in the middle of Hollywood. They started building the Target store because somebody kind of fast forwarded it through the city, and it got approved, and it ended up being like 70 feet taller than they were allowed to. And that Target stood there for probably almost like 8 years or something, unfinished.
It felt like over a decade,
Yeah.
But then they finished it, and it's open now, and it's operating. So it's like I said, eventually they figure it out.
It just, rarely do they get caught out on those things.
Yep. In other current events, Lady Gaga's dogs. She got her dogs back from that shooting that happened on the street where Chibo is on Sunset, right where the florist used to be. As well, the name
Parisian,
of it, Parisian florist, which sent the roses to Marilyn's grave for Joe DiMaggio. It's on that same block, basically, just north of there. There was a shooting a few weeks ago, and two of Lady Gaga's 3 French bulldogs were stolen, and her dog walker was shot. Luckily, he survived. And supposedly now they've arrested 5 people, including the woman who turned them in, to try to get the $500,000 reward money that she was offering. And Gaga, I think the police told Lady Gaga, hold off on paying that reward because this is fishy. And then it turned out I think the woman that turned them in is the girlfriend of the father of one of the guys that is now accused of being. So they tried to find somebody removed from them enough that maybe wouldn't come back to them, I guess, that, hey, let's try to get the reward money, which is just brazen. They probably wouldn't have got caught if they just turned them loose or dropped them off at a pound somewhere or something. Maybe they would have got away with it. But
or
it's
sold
they tried
it
to
like
get that
they
money.
Originally intended to do. Just sell it to another rich person. But no, they got greedy, and it was interesting because she got a bit of flack. She did, Gaga. I hate saying that name, but she got some flack because when the dogs got stolen, and her dog walkers, and got shot in the lung, and
fighting for his life,
screaming and stuff. And then she tweets, and she goes, "I am just heartbroken and devastated," with a picture of her dogs. It's like, okay, she got a bit of flack for that, and she was caught up in the drama.
All of social media was doing the same thing though. It was like, oh, her dog walker got shot and the dogs have been taken. Everybody's like, oh my god, are the dogs okay? It's like there's a human being
and that
fighting for his life.
Did you watch
I care
that
about
video?
The dogs as well.
Yeah.
What?
No, the poor guy was just screaming, and he was I guess he knew. Yeah. He was I don't know if he was an EMT or something like that, but he knew that his lungs were filling with blood, and he was screaming. It was crazy, wild. He said, "I hope she takes care of him."
I'm sure. I mean, he's already probably pretty well taken care of, anyways. But yeah. And after he was shot, the one dog that got away that wasn't stolen came back and I guess laid next to him while they waited for.
That's sweet.
Yeah. So, that's nice. And waited for him while they were waiting for the paramedics to get there. I don't know if you heard about this. They're doing a Fantasy Island reboot.
I did hear that. Yeah. I got really, really disinterested rather quickly.
And then
although I liked the last movie they did, I thought the movie was fun that they did recently.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe this will be fun too, Scott. Who knows? Yeah, I know. You never know. You never know. And then I was just going to show this off. I show this off on our Patreon, but in honor of Michael Collins, one of the Apollo 11 astronauts passing away, I have to show this off to everybody. My grandfather was an Apollo 11 or Apollo engineer, and this is his Apollo hard hat that he
That's so cool.
that he had. And if you watch any of the old documentary footage of the launches, you see guys walking around with these blue hats on. It says CSM on the side, which I believe would have stood for the Command Services Module, which is what they kind of lived in. It was like their life support module. CSM on the sides, his name on the front, and Apollo CSM on the back. And then it has some of the mission stickers. There's Apollo 7, Apollo 13. I think that's Apollo 12. And my guess is he put Apollo 11 at the top, but these have long since, some of them have fallen off over the years that he owned it. So I don't have it anymore. But yeah, there it is. It's an actual Apollo mission hard hat that was his. Guess whenever they were anywhere whenever anything was being worked on or whatever down at the place, he had to wear this around. So.
That is so cool. That is so cool.
All right. Is that it for current events?
I think so. Anything current events I care to talk about?
the stuff that matters to us. We do have one tiny piece of hate mail that's only one word long.
Hate mail.
It's we had a 1-star iTunes review, and the review just said cringe, which I take as a compliment.
I wonder what made them write that.
I don't know. Maybe in order to write the rating. Specific. Yeah, what was cringy? I don't know.
At least they left a review.
I mean, a 5-star review could just as easily say cringe also. It just depends on what you're into.
True. You know? True.
What you consider entertaining. But that's not bad hate mail, though, a cringe.
No, there's a lot. I've got so used to the nasty people that I'm sort of. I mean, I don't see the Patreon. I don't see the Apple things. I should be more aware of what's going on with the reviews on Apple.
Mostly very positive though. We have like a 5-star average rating, and most of it's
nice.
They love us and want us to do more shows and all that stuff. So yeah,
cool. Yeah, it's not. It's some people just have nothing better to do but just go, take a dump.
And last but not least, before we get into our main story, you have something about Marilyn Monroe, I believe, in a statue, correct?
26 feet of Norma Jean. It's like a big. Everyone's all in a huff about it right now. Literally has their panties in a bunch about Marilyn's panties. Because they're bringing the statue back. You know, the 26-foot tall Marilyn iconic statue, 7-year-edge pose, was here for a few years. They rented it, whoever it was, and now the city put together enough money, or the Businessmen's Association, to have it permanently on display here. So the Palm Springs Art Museum has been designated as the place to put it. And everyone that works at the museum or has something to do with the museum, or everyone is Me Tooing it to hell because it's showing this lady with her panties up, and they say that everyone's going to walk out of the museum looking at this woman's panties, and it's misogynistic, and it's like, it's Marilyn, you're in Palm Springs, you know. Now, I'm not necessarily not on board with them not having it there. I think it's a great opportunity to open up another space to be a focal point for tourists, you know, put it on the other side of town where there's some empty area. You know, I don't necessarily want her to be there, but it's funny when you see the real things that are going on in the world, the real protests that are going on in the world, and these people are just screaming about this Marilyn statue in Palm Springs.
And it's the famous scene, it's the famous scene from the 7-Year Itch where she's standing over the subway grate and it's blowing her dress up, and she's fighting to keep it down. It's the statues of that moment. So that's why some people have taken issue with the content of it, and the fact that you can basically walk under the statue and I guess look up the dress, but it's a statue. I don't know.
It's just a location. If it wasn't where they chose to put it, we wouldn't be having this problem. But it's just the stances that people are taking are they're interesting. I'll just say that. But she was supposed to be already unveiled, but I don't know. It's still, there's a lawsuit pending. I don't know. It was supposed to be done a few weeks ago, but it's not.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. Palm Springs life. These are not normal people problems. And here we are.
All right. So the main event is Star Wars.
It's time for the main feature.
And we are recording this on May the 4th, which is now commonly known as Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. And so you won't be watching this on May 4th, but this is when we're recording it. So it's in the spirit of May 4th. And we already wanted to do a Star Wars episode anyways, so we figured why not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was a huge Star Wars fan when it came out. I saw the movie probably 10 times, which was a lot at that point. In 77 when it came out, and I had the sheets, I had the posters from Burger King, I had the cups, I had every the Disco Star Wars album, it was I was a Star Wars nut. I love the R2D2 cookie jar, and I had a C3PO necklace. I was big into it, but it wasn't for the sci-fi aspect of it. I understand the sci-fi aspect of it, and that's cool. But I loved it as a story. It was just an awesome story. I was confused when they called it episode 5, I think is what it was when it first was. It 6
episode
or 4?
Episode 4, A New Hope is like now the official name of it. Yeah,
right. Nobody knew that it was going to be a big hit. However, when it was released, there were people lined up around the block like for days ahead of time at the Chinese theater. And that's something I never really quite understood.
I read a lot of, I have not finished with it yet, but I read a lot of The Making of Star Wars, which is subtitled The Definitive Story Behind the Original Film. Exhaustive book. And I have the digital copy of it, which includes multimedia stuff. It includes interview clips with George Lucas and videos and stuff, and tons of photos that you can zoom in on because they're high quality. And it is everything you would want to know pretty much about Star Wars. And it's funny because George Lucas, he didn't think original budget was going to be $3 million, which in today's money would be like $18 million. So even today it would be considered a low budget film. It ended up blowing up, ballooning to 2 or 3 times that amount by the time it was done. But he didn't think it would make more than 16 to 20 million. So even with him, there's kind of a contradiction in that he didn't think it was going to make that much, and yet he was planning this whole universe. He also felt this wouldn't be the last one that they were going to make, and that's why he wanted to have all the ancillary rights, a big stake in the merchandising and all that stuff, because he felt like this was going to go somewhere. And he made the movie because American Graffiti was a surprise hit. Another movie kind of like Star Wars, where the studio didn't really believe in it until it came out and was a smash. And people loved it. And George Lucas realized that at that time period in the late 70s, they really weren't making movies for young people and kids anymore. They were not that 12 to 20-year-old age demo, which used to be who all the movies were made for practically, weren't getting anything because Westerns were out of fashion. Swashbuckling movies were out of fashion. Sci-fi was kind of goofy. And so it was just serious dramas and cop content, police content was basically all people were doing. And he was like, wow, there's a huge opportunity here, and he was totally right.
I guess Fox had thought, they put their money behind The Other Side of Midnight, and they thought that was going to be the huge hit of that summer, and ended up, no.
No.
I mean, didn't it open on like 100 screens or something, and then within a month it was 1,700 screens. It was something, an insane growth. They must have been making prints, like crazy overtime, making prints of that movie to get it out there. But man, the hype, the hoopla, that was such a big deal.
Have you ever heard this? Somebody made an audio recording of the audience watching Star Wars in its original run back in '77.
I did.
It's a really great thing. Oh, really? Well, somebody else.
I had my. Sorry.
That's what somebody. Have you ever put it out there? Because somebody actually did that, and they actually released it for the ending scene. You know, when they blow up the Death Star, they actually had that in there, and you can hear the audience reacting, and then the big cheer that goes up when it happens, and it's really freaking cool. It's a great historical artifact. You know, an illegal pirated audio recording of the movie, but ends up being a great historical document.
Yeah, I snuck my cassette player in, which was, at that point probably like that, and I recorded the whole movie. I was a nut for that movie. So I haven't listened to it, but I mean I have all my cassettes. I should check that out. I did that for the Rocky Horror Picture Show too, which is kind of fun in retrospect, because he just encapsulates the moment. But Star Wars, that was bananas. That was such a insane, fun movie. And it's fascinating to watch the clips without the sound effects and the green screen and stuff like that, and how they filmed it.
Before it was color graded and everything, it just looks really rough. Yeah.
Yeah. They were winging it. Some of it was just. Well, they said that Alec Guinness was they were giving him lines the day of. I think
right.
They were modifying his script every day.
And the dialogue is ridiculous to begin with. And that was kind of funny going through the drafts project, the process of writing the script, all the various drafts that George Lucas wrote, and he keeps sending it in, and nobody understands what the story is. It sounds cool, but every actor that auditioned was I had to read the script 8 times before I figured out how it all went, what the hell he was trying to say. And George Lucas was brilliant because what he did, he realized this, and he ended up putting up close to $500,000 of his own money during the development period of Star Wars when he was writing the script. He had no guarantee yet that they were actually going to make it. He was just getting paid a little bit of money to write it. They didn't know it was going to get greenlit yet, but he was making all this money from American Graffiti, and he just started putting his own money into hiring mainly this guy named Ralph Mcquarrie, who did all the concept art and did all the designs, because Lucas realized you can't really make sense of the script, so let me give them visual aids, the studio execs and actors and whoever, to show them here's what the characters are going to look like, here's what the spaceships are going to look like. Whenever we talk about the Death Star, here's what the Death Star we think is going to look like. And that helped bring it to life for people. Even if they didn't understand what was written, they understood pictures and could see, oh, okay, I see what you mean and what you're trying to do. And that really probably maybe Star Wars would have never been made, very likely, had George Lucas not self-funded basically the founding of ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, and the model building. He hired model builders and Ralph Mcquarrie to do the artwork. If he had not taken that risk with his own money, it might not have ever gotten greenlit as a result.
Yeah. And the scripts are, the acting, he was basically making a Western in space. That's what it was. It was cowboys and Indians sort of thing. And, bad guys, good guys, ultimately, and the princess and the fairy, whatever. Yeah, it's just it was sort of Western in space, honestly. So he was taking a proven formula and just putting it out there. But the special effects were outstanding. Nobody was doing that. Nobody.
Yeah, he hired some people that had worked on 2001: Space Odyssey, because that was the gold standard. Even, almost a decade later when they made Star Wars, that was still the one that everybody was trying to emulate. So he brought some of those people in, and they basically had to build a lot of their own equipment, or at least modify equipment for the motion capture, because the shots that he wanted to do, he didn't want... It used to be that when you did an effect shot, the camera would be locked off, because you couldn't have the camera moving around, because then if you try to put 2 images together, it looks wrong. So, and then he felt that sent a visual cue to the audience that, oh, this part is not real, because we're about to do a special effect. He felt like it took audiences out of it. So he wanted to be able to do effect shots where the camera's moving. So they created, they already kind of had it, but it's motion control camera, where they could duplicate the same camera move precisely over and over again, so that they would all match up when they put all these models together. Because you could have 4 or 5 different shots in one shot, basically compiled together. And the camera had to be move exactly the same way every time. But he wanted that so the audience would never get taken out of it. It would still have the almost handheld-like quality to it that all the other scenes had. And I think that's one of the big reasons that it worked as well as it did, and didn't look as kind of hokey as a lot of other sci-fi movies before it looked,
Yeah.
and after, be honest.
And when they were on that vehicle, that floating vehicle, there was a term for that.
It was the land speeder is what it was called. It was called the land speeder.
Okay, but it was really in the movie. I even remember seeing it in '77, thinking, it looks a little, when you look underneath it, it was a bit, it's supposed to be floating, and you could tell it was a bit. And
it's
then
bouncing
he went back
like it's on wheels, yeah. And it had they did the effect by just using mirrors.
Yeah.
To cover the wheels up, and it looks like it's floating. And I looked this up. It was one thing I caught. I got to go back to Ralph McQuarrie for a second. He passed away in March 3rd, 2012. He was famous for Star Wars trilogy, of course. He also worked on the original Battlestar Galactica series. He worked on E.T., Cocoon. He was a groundbreaking conceptual. His artwork is just beautiful. And I saw a piece of little ephemera, this envelope that was sent in with some of his conceptual drawings, had his address on it at the time. And he lived at the corner of Cushing and San Vicente in Los Angeles. And it was like an apartment building there. I think it was 1071 South Cushing Avenue. And so, and there's still a building there today. So depending on what unit you have, you very well may live in the apartment where Ralph McQuarrie drew probably most of the concept art for Star Wars.
I hope that I hope that Lucas gave him points, from the gross of the movie. I really do, because I know he gave that to Alec Guinness.
Alec Guinness got 2%. Yeah.
Yeah. And I always heard that Carrie and Harrison and Mark got a percentage too, but nobody's ever come out and said that. They've been bitter about merchandise, but they've kind of kept their mouths shut about the other stuff. I think they got points. I don't think it was a go nowhere movie. Nobody knew what was going to happen. It was just. Yeah.
I think a lot of them, I know I did come across when I was reading up on David Prowse, who was the man in the Darth Vader suit who did the actual physical acting on screen for most of it. He was supposed to get residuals off Return of the Jedi that he claims he never got. So I suspect that maybe they didn't get it off the first movie, but when it was a hit and, they came in to negotiate for their next roles, they probably were like, okay, we want a back-end piece of this. So,
but now Prowse, I remember his thing, the guy that was Vader, he was supposed to get, I don't think it was going to be points. He said it, but he was also banned from Star Wars conventions for years because he burned bridges, they said, with Lucasfilm. But he said that originally when they took off Darth Vader's mask, it was supposed to be his voice. Yeah. And then they changed it to another actor. And so he claimed to have gotten screwed over by Lucasfilm, and Lucasfilm just got tired of him.
There's multiple. So in the first movie, while they're filming, he gets replaced by a stuntman for a lot of the sword fighting scenes, a lot of the lightsaber scenes, because he kept breaking the props, and he just wasn't trained up enough at sword fighting. So the choreographer for the movie was a stand-in for him to do those fight scenes. So first, I think he was a little rubbed wrong about that. He didn't get to do those. He tried to get him to let him do them later in Return of the Jedi. They wouldn't let him. He wanted to be the one to throw the Emperor, at the end of Return of the Jedi, because the guy, the stuntman, was having trouble getting it right, and I think they still wouldn't let him. So he was butthurt about that. Then there's some debate about whether or not he knew that they were going to replace his voice with James Earl Jones or not. And I think he has no problem with the fact that James Earl Jones did the voice. I think he just didn't. He thought it was going to be his when they recorded the film, and then Lucas changed his mind in post about.
Yeah, because they sounded. Carrie Fisher called him like Darth Farmer or something like that. They made some kind of joke because he
had what's called a West Country accent, which I don't know what that sounds like.
It's Bristol, but I mean, it's funny in England too. The guy down the street has a different accent. They have so many different accents there, but he was from Bristol. But yeah, it was just not becoming
Darth Farmer,
who you thought. But I have a friend who was one of the stand-ins for Vader and for Chewbacca in the first three films, actually. And his name was Stephen Calcutt, and he was in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. He was the tall, skinny Transylvanian with the long hair in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And when I interviewed him for that, I was listening to that interview again this week for this podcast. And we talked for an hour about Rocky Horror and about different commercials that he was in and this and that. And he goes, and I did Star Wars, but I don't talk about that because no one really thinks about that. And this was in the mid-90s when I interviewed him. And now you go to his page on Facebook. I mean, he is famous like huge in the Star Wars world. He does all the conventions,
sure,
because he was the stand-ins for both Chewbacca and for Darth Vader during the original film, and or the original 3 films.
And coincidentally, David Prowse was originally offered Chewbacca. And they kind of gave him the choice of the two because he's 6'6", a bodybuilder. He could have, played Chewbacca probably if he'd really wanted to. And he wanted to be Vader because he wanted to be the bad guy. He thought everybody remembers the villain, is what he says. So
now, I'm going to say something that may be controversial. I don't think so, but they were in costumes and they weren't using their voices.
Right.
Peter Mayhew and David Prowse and Kenny Baker, they were in costumes. They didn't use their voices.
Right.
And there was something like, when the other guy that Peter Mayhew died, they're like, are they going to make the other episode of Star Wars without him? It's like, well,
they already did.
A costume.
They already were.
It's a costume. And I know, I'm not trying to dismiss, there isn't movement acting, most definitely. But it's a costume.
One of the reasons that Daniels was cast as C-3PO was because he had a lot of experience miming, apparently. And so since he doesn't have a mouth that can move, it's all action. It's all movement and action. Plus, he has to be a robot. David Prowse, the final kind of injustice to him was in Return of the Jedi when they pull the mask off. Here's finally his chance for you to see his face, and instead it's an actor named Sebastian Shaw. Like, he just got every step of the way. I think he felt like he was screwed over. And then there was the money issue with the residuals that he claimed about Return of the Jedi. And like you said, he ended up getting banned from Star Wars events in 2010 because they couldn't trust him to not say stupid, controversial things, I guess. And as George said, he burned too many bridges.
He was also, we'll talk more about the films, but he was in a lot of Hammer films, the Hammer horror movies, which were also filmed at Bray Studios, which were Rocky Horror related. There's a few Rocky Horror references in both of these, both of the movies, because Bray Studios was across from Oakley Court, the big mansion that was used in Rocky Horror, and also used in some of the Hammer horror films, the House of Dracula, Christopher Lee ones, and so they were sort of like the British classic Universal horror films, but from Britain in the 70s, and but he was in a couple of those with Peter Cushing, who was Grand Moff Tarkin.
And David Prowse is the most recent cast member to pass away. He passed away on November 28th of 2020, so just a few months ago. And his sister, I believe, revealed that it was COVID-19. I think they kind of kept that quiet at first, but then eventually said it was COVID. And he was 85 years old. And then you talked about being in horror films and stuff. Peter Cushing, who was Grand Moff Tarkin. He was in Frankenstein and Dracula and The Abominable Snowman and The Mummy, the ones they did back in the 50s. He was in a bunch of those movies, I guess, because he just had that look, he had that great face with the cheekbones and the kind of hollowed out cheeks. He just had that facial bone structure for it, I think, to play those dark characters.
It sounds like I think that George Lucas had him in mind. Number one, I think he knew who he wanted. I believe at that point, Peter Cushing.
And the only one that I know that he really pursued from pretty much day one, just about, is Guinness. He wanted Guinness to play Obi-Wan. Or somebody, the Obi-Wan character kept switching, and was, for a time, it was a more of a general character, and then a general in the military, and then he became Obi-Wan and whatever. But he really pursued Sir Alec Guinness, whereas Princess Leia and Han Solo and Luke were all kind of up in the air up until just a few months before they started shooting, or even weeks. But he really wanted Guinness.
Well, see, and Cushing claimed that he was offered Obi-Wan first.
That's interesting.
That's what he said. He said he was also approached by John Carpenter to play the Doctor Loomis in the first Halloween movie in '77.
Wow.
Which would have been, all right. That would have been okay.
Did you see the Rogue One Star Wars movie? Rogue One?
Probably. I don't know. I don't know.
It's fantastic. It's so freaking good. I think it's the best one of the new films that they've made is Rogue One. And it's it's all about it's like a little prequel to the first Star Wars. It's all about how they got the plans for the Death Star. That's the plot.
Yeah.
And they brought back, since Peter Cushing passed away on August 11th, 1994, he had had cancer for many years. He was 81. He had been dead for decades by the time they made Rogue One, and they needed his character back, so they brought him back with CGI, and they brought back Carrie Fisher as a young Princess Leia as well, for the kind of the final shot in the movie. So, and there was a lot of controversy over whether it's ethical or not. This is one of the big conversations going on in filmmaking right now. Is it ethical to do CGI, really lifelike close-up CGI shots of actors that are dead, and basically have them do a performance that they didn't do and they didn't sign off on, essentially, right? They didn't agree to.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. I think it's awesome.
Well, sentimentally, it is sentimentally. Yeah, you want to see him again, but you're right. I had that problem with when Natalie Cole did the duets with her father. He wasn't approached, he wasn't asked, and they're kind of what when they somebody described George who was the producer for the Beatles,
George
Martin.
Anyway,
George Martin, thank you.
Yeah.
And when they were doing the soundtrack for Love, the Vegas show, and it was they're putting together sort of mashups of all the Beatles songs. He said it was like putting a mustache on the Mona Lisa, and that's sort of an interesting way to put it. When you're taking a piece that's so a lot of people would call perfect and manipulating it, and they call it deep fake. I guess that's what they were. It was sort of a trending video. Yeah. So somebody said that the James Dean estate had sold settled on an agreement to do a movie with James Dean. It just like fabricated James Dean. It's ethically I do think it's dodgy. I think it's really dodgy. It's like a weird kind of cloning, and I don't know if I'm into that.
You're right. It kind of is.
But
like that.
They got a fortune for it, though, no doubt about it. Peter Cushing's family. Oh yeah, I'm sure they got a fortune to have him CGI'd.
They most likely did have, because there's it's kind of a state by state law in the U.S. How life rights work after someone passes away. I think a lot of times it's the 70-year rule that exists kind of with copyright in law in general. Mm-hmm. But in New York, I think it doesn't exist. And coincidentally, in Tennessee, it is forever. You have to go and get the permission, and that is because of Elvis and the Elvis estate. They got that passed in Tennessee so that you have to go through the Elvis estate to do anything with his...
So is that like because of those hologram shows they were doing or something, you think?
I don't know what the timing of when that law got passed in Tennessee. I just know it has something to do with Elvis and his estate.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, they probably almost definitely had to go to Cushing's estate and give his okay. And the same thing with Carrie Fisher. But Fisher had been in so many of these movies, they might have already been worked into her contract. That, if something happens.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Her image, yeah.
You ever watch Bojack Horseman?
Oh God, I think
so
I have.
Good. I love it so much. I love that show so much. But I believe there was a plot line with him where he gets replaced on a show he's on by his own CGI version of himself, and then finds out that in his contract he signed that away so they can replace him with a fake version of him on the series.
Wow. I wonder why. I wonder why we haven't seen deep fake porn.
Yeah.
Like people like, Farrah Fawcett or James Dean or...
I mean, it's one of the things that a lot of actresses especially are concerned about, obviously, with their image being used like in that way, obviously. There's already, fake, naked shots that they say are of celebrities that are just lookalikes. They already use lookalikes and stuff. But it's been a hot topic for a long time.
They have those filters on you could do it on your phone now. Put yourself in Smokey and the Bandit or something. Yeah. And so I would imagine that exists, but I've seen parody porn. I saw there's a couple of Star Wars parody porn, which are quite good as far as special effects and their costumes. They did a good job with it. But
probably not going to get endorsed by George Lucas though, like Spielberg did with the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
They do. I don't know. There's some sort of freedom of parody. They can get away with it. I'm not quite sure the logistics of all that, but
my guess is that it is still so technologically difficult to really pull off a good deep fake for an extended scene that the resources it would take to create it would take a company to get behind that, and a company knows they're going to probably get sued by whoever it is that they're faking. So my guess is they just don't want to. They don't want to touch it.
But
no pun intended. But the technology
absolutely.
Who do you want to talk about next?
We talk about Peter. Well, we can talk about Peter Mayhew if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Who was Chewbacca?
Yep. And he was Chewie in five. He was Chewie in 5 Star Wars films: the original trilogy, the third of the prequels, the last film of the prequel trilogy, and then the first of the new trilogy. He was in all of those. And then when the new trilogy came along, he was in the first one, but he was already kind of starting to pass the torch on to the actor that was going to replace him. And there's some nice behind-the-scenes stuff of them, getting to know each other, and the new actor being, very respectful of the role he's taking over, and learning Mayhew's movements and stuff so that it's believable. And I don't know, I think he's done a great job.
It's a costume. Sorry. I'm sorry. No, I don't. I know I just say they're saying that Mayhew was a big guy, 7 foot tall or something like that.
He was 7'3".
7'3", and he wasn't. But he wasn't. Although he wrote two books, "Growing Up Giant" and "My Favorite Giant," but he wasn't a giant. He didn't have giantism.
Right.
But he was just a really tall guy. And he said, they say he did all his research by going to the zoo and learning, watching the animals. I mean, maybe he did, I'm sure. And he probably had to audition, the movement. I'm not belittling him at all.
Sure.
But passing the torch to another guy in a costume, no lines, none of those noises came out of him. He was just a guy in a costume. Again, it sounds like I'm being shitty. I don't mean it that way. I'm just saying,
right?
I could have done it. I probably could have done it with a bit of help, and about another foot on me, tall wise.
Right. He was 7'3" as a result of a genetic disorder called Marfan syndrome, or Marfan syndrome. So as he said, it wasn't gigantism or whatever the term is that you just said. He said it wasn't that because he didn't have the big head that typically came with that. He had a normal sized person's head. He was just that people that have Marfan syndrome tend to be very tall and skinny and have kind of lanky, gangly arms and legs. So, but he was working as a hospital orderly when he was cast as Chewbacca and had his whole life changed.
I just had a memory that just came back, and maybe I told this story before, and this is really a gross story.
Well, is it about Mayhew?
Peter Mayhew.
Well, he has passed away since we started doing this series, so we did mention.
Okay, I must have told
him, but I don't know if you've told it yet. But tell it again because I don't remember.
It's such a gross story. Such a gross story.
Maybe,
but
not.
I was really hungover. And my ex was doing a radio show, and it was live. Usually they do it in a studio. This was live in front of an audience, and Peter Mayhew was one of the guests, and we were talking afterwards, and I had to pass gas. So I walked far away, maybe 25 feet away. And I was like, minding my own business and, doing what I had to do. And then my ex, I could tell he was pointing at me and talking to Peter Mayhew and making some kind of remark about what I'm doing. It's like all of a sudden I just freaked out. I panicked. And I went back up there to start talking to him. I brought it with me.
Oh, no.
And we're just talking, and all of a sudden it just goes really bad. and people are just really uncomfortable because everyone knows it was me. And it was so...
It arrived when you arrived.
It was bad. It was really gross. And now, in retrospect, still very uncomfortable. But I shared my very personal space with Peter Mayhew, and he was angry about that. But not angry because it's British. British, you're just like, we know what's going on here. But sorry. So I told you that story already. I'm sorry.
The Wookiee did not win in that moment, is what you're trying to say.
No. And he had the last line in the film. He had the very last line in the first Star Wars movie.
Yeah, he roars. Yeah, he's the only one who doesn't get a medal but then he gets to growl at the end. Yeah. Yep.
The last line. He was also in the... Were you even born when this movie came out?
Star Wars?
Yeah.
Okay, Star Wars came out a year before I was born. Empire Strikes Back came out when I was 2. My big one... So I've always existed in a world that has Star Wars in it. My big film was Return of the Jedi. I freaking adored Return of the Jedi, even to this day. I know it's not the most popular of the original trilogy. A lot of people didn't like the Ewoks. I was like 6 or 7. I freaking loved the Ewoks. I was an Ewok for Halloween. If you watch the video version of this, I'll throw up the costume that my mom hand sewed from fake fur of my Ewok costume. It's awesome. I was I think the following year I was Han Solo, but it was just a outfit that I picked out that I know I looked nothing like Han Solo, but that's what I told everybody I was. And I just remember my mom kept asking me, "Do you sure you don't want me to make you a costume?" I was like, "No, I'll just put this vest on and carry this like plastic gun around, and people will know I'm Han Solo."
It's acting.
Yes, exactly. But the Ewok costume was one for the ages. It's of all the ones my mom, she was a sewer. Of all the ones she did, it was the best one. So I have photos of it, so I'll post it.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's so cool. That's so cool. They did
and I'll just say one other thing. I remember that came out, and then I remember we had a family reunion up in Tahoe in this big house in the woods, and those big trees and around Tahoe reminded me so much of Endor, the Ewoks in the Ewok village, and for me it just like cemented in my mind that like that was like real, like that's all real. Like I just saw Return of the Jedi, and now I'm where it looks like they filmed the Ewok stuff. It was just made like very real to me, And I remember my cousins and I playing Star Wars stuff and doing Star Wars art and. Yeah.
It's really cool. Another weird connection to Rocky Horror. My friend Sadie, she was an Ewok who was a little Transylvanian in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, along with Kenny Baker, who was an Ewok in some of those scenes.
I didn't know that.
But yeah, he played. I forget which one it was, but they have names apparently. I don't even remember.
So Peter Mayhew, since we've talked about his death before, he had a bunch of health issues, largely related to his height. He had double knee replacement surgery in 2013. He had been basically confined to a wheelchair for a couple years leading up to that. Finally got his knees replaced. Then 2 years later in 2015, he got hospitalized for pneumonia. In 2018, he had spinal surgery. And finally, on April 30th, 2019, he had a heart attack and passed away. He was 74. And heart conditions are another side effect of having the Marfan syndrome that he had that made him tall. So
just as much as the little people live forever, tall people just tend to not.
They have all kinds of problems, yep.
Yeah, ailments.
So he is buried in Reno, Texas, which is northwest of, it's outside Fort Worth. He lived in Texas with his wife. I think his wife was Texan, and he lived in a place called Boyd, Texas, for years and years and years with his wife. And he is buried in the Azleland Memorial Park in Reno, Texas. Azleland. And I looked it up, and they have a recreation of Christ's tomb with the rock rolled away on as part of their cemetery. So look up Azleland Memorial
I have seen those
Park.
in other cemeteries.
Yes, I'd never seen it before. It is quite a sight.
Yeah. And he was, don't forget though, he was in the Star Wars Christmas special that they threw together that year. That was
the infamous Christmas special.
And I had the 45 of what do you get a Wookiee for Christmas? And, I probably still do, but yeah,
that's the one where Carrie Fisher sings the song at the end. I think, right?
I don't remember her in it at all.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh my God. They were just throwing that together. Wasn't B. Arthur in that? I mean, it was
so bad. Yeah, they had to get. It wasn't Christmas. It was like the Wookiees' Life Day or Life Force Day or something like that. And the whole the plot is trying to get Chewie home to his Wookiee family, in time for this special holiday, and that's basically the gist of it. Yeah. Yeah, it was is notoriously one of the most campy things ever made, and for a long time you couldn't get it unless you passed around tapes. People had bootleg copies of it. Now, of course, because of the internet, you can find it; it's everywhere. But it's almost like they shot it and then tried to forget it ever existed after it aired. So,
I mean, this became people. I don't know if people nowadays would realize what an industry this thing became. I mean, it was everywhere. There were tribute record albums, and there were like dozens of them, and the costumes and the other, the parodies they did of it, and it became it started a whole new sci-fi genre, and they were throwing these movies out on TV shows and everything. I mean, it really changed movies and pop culture. There was so much Star Wars stuff everywhere, and you just couldn't get away from it. I mean, all the toys, they were just kicking them out. God, everything was soap and candies and you name it. It was Star Wars everything, and I had it all. I had all that Star Wars stuff. I still have some of my old comic books and magazines, Mad Magazine and stuff like that. I just loved it.
The Star Wars toys were like what the older kids had when I was growing up, because by the time I came around, it was G.I. Joe. And I remember the Star Wars ones were a little more primitive because you couldn't bend the elbows and you couldn't bend the knees on the figures, and on G.I. Joe you could. So there was more you could do with them, but I remember Star Wars toys being prevalent. It was like if I went over to a friend's house, his older brother had like a bunch of Star Wars toys. That seemed to be like, if I'd been born just a few years earlier, I probably would have had a Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
Which was kind of the Millennium Falcon. I think was like the ultimate, the holy grail Star Wars toy to own, because it was so well designed. It was huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to that auction house last year when they were selling the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood cars, and they had a whole thing on Star Wars there, and it was really something to be there and to see one of those, like, I believe it was that ship, the first one that comes in the first movie that comes in and swoops up there.
It's
and
like 7 feet long.
That was like right there. I mean, I could have touched it. There were pieces of it that were broken off. I could tell it'd been around. But it was like nobody, they're just like, yeah, no, have a look around. And I was like, I mean, it wasn't just anybody off the street. We made arrangements, but I could have just gone like that and broke huge pieces off of it. They had one of the Imperial Stormtrooper, original from the 77 movie. They had a Darth Vader, but I don't think that was ever screen used. I think it was used for appearances, but it was true to the original costume. But it was pretty cool to see that stuff up close. But see, I was more of I loved it, but I loved the movie. I loved the story. I was, the guns and the spaceships and things. Those were all fun. I loved it, but it wasn't my, it was more the pop culture stuff that really got me going. Loved that.
So rest in peace, Peter Mayhew.
The marketing, that's what it just blows my mind when I think about it. That's all. And now those little dolls are worth a fortune. You can't. They're. It's like you can't just buy dolls and play with them anymore. You got to keep them in the box. You have to be, and they can't. You got to wrap them in tissue and don't open it. And
it's like the sneakerheads that buy shoes they never wear because they're worth thousands later and all that.
Yeah.
I'm a terrible collector because I want to play with everything. I would never.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Unless I was like rich. Unless I was like a rich kid and I could buy 2 of everything and not open one of them.
There's that too. Yeah, truly.
Yeah. So Kenny Baker, we mentioned him earlier. R2D2. Kenny Baker was 3'8", and
I was wondering, he was a dwarf.
He was 3 foot. He was literally half the height of Peter Mayhew. If you took another Kenny Baker and had him stand on his own head, he would be looking pretty much eyeball to eyeball with Peter Mayhew. So yeah, he was very tiny. And I believe, based on reading this book that I've been reading, he is the first person that they cast, because the guys making the props needed to know who was going to go in the little trash can, for R2D2, and they needed to put him in there so that they knew what they were building would actually work with a person in it. And so he ended up being, I believe, the very first actor cast, or at least that's the gist I got from reading this book, because they needed him before they needed all the other actors.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but famously, you want to talk about David Prowse and feuds, Kenny Baker and Anthony Daniels, who played C-3PO, have one of the most infamous feuds in Hollywood history. They hated each other. I
knew that they did. I didn't know it was that big of a deal. Kenny Baker, I read a couple of things that he said that, he wasn't very sociable, but I never heard any kind of real nastiness.
Baker, well, I think what happened was they didn't get along, and then it was kind of let sleeping dogs lie. But then in the early 2000s, I think Baker started talking trash again in interviews. He called Daniels the rudest man I've ever met. Mm-hmm. He said that Daniels was belittling to him and would always call him little man. That I guess he walked up to Daniels one time to talk to him, and Daniels was rude and snapped, can't you see I'm talking or having a conversation? He referred to Daniels as golden balls. And then Daniels has said that he doesn't know where this is coming from, but but publicly Daniels said that working with Baker was like working with a bucket. I think basically Daniels I think part of it too is that Daniels felt that Baker's comments about him were not fair. Because Baker was just mad that Daniels didn't seem to want to socialize with him. But I think also the problem is that Daniels saw that what he was doing as C-3PO was actual acting performance. And Baker was. And I think he saw Baker as just like a prop. He's operating a prop. He's not actually acting. The thing doesn't talk. Yeah. He's just rolling around in this thing. I think he kind of felt like we're not on the same level, And plus, Daniels was like, because he wasn't talking, Daniels had to create his own dialogue in his head of what R2-D2 was probably saying to him so that he could react to it. So Daniels felt like what he was doing was like a really hard job, and he just didn't feel like Baker was at his level. And then later on, when Baker wanted to do the fan conventions with Daniels, because how great would that be, R2-D2 and C-3PO actors together, Daniels wouldn't do it. So there was a financial angle.
I don't think Daniels does any of those things, does he? He could make a fortune doing this, but I don't think he does.
I think he started doing it more recently, but at the time he wasn't interested. Yeah.
He's a thespian.
Yeah,
but ultimately, Kenny Baker, he's the guy that fit into the suit. There was no real acting, and I'm not saying, if they could have done away with it and just had it computerized, they'd have done it.
Right.
And even as the guy in the costume, if you look at those outtakes, he was always like, ramming into walls and stuff like that. There are a lot of scenes where he was not, I'm not dismissing what he did. He was, he was in Time Bandits. He was in The Elephant Man. He was also in like I said, there's another Rocky Horror thing. He was in a movie called The Wombles were like I'm trying to what they would be in America. They were like a family, a live action family of these. They were Wombles. They were like little animals, and there were little people in suits. And my friend Sadie was a Womble, and so was Kenny Baker with him. And she told me that Kenny was pursuing her and wanted to marry her, and she wouldn't have anything to do with it. But they maintained a real friendly relationship for many years. And I said they were both Ewoks. Kenny was he was supposed to have a much larger part as an Ewok, but he ended up being ill and ended up being a minor Ewok. They had names. Ewoks?
Some of them did, yeah. I mean, not all. I mean, they weren't named in the movie, but I guess they had names in the script, so you could tell the difference between them. And now the fans have picked up on that, what the different names were. Yeah.
You got to be a real fan to know all that stuff.
The names of the Ewoks, yeah. I was just a generic Ewok for Halloween. I don't know what my Ewok name was. It was a brown Ewok. That's what it was. Speaking of little people, when Kenny Baker went to his interview to get the role for R2-D2, he brought his cabaret partner with him, another little person named Jack Purvis. And Jack Purvis, because of that, ended up getting a role as the head Jawa. In Star Wars.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. I know that name, but I didn't go forward.
He was another little person that acted in a bunch of stuff, just like they did, just like Kenny Baker did.
Yeah. Because I knew he was part of like a troupe or a trio or something, and he almost didn't take the part because he didn't want to break up the band, as it were.
Sure.
And wisely did, because they kept him, Those people made a fortune at autograph shows. My God, even Carrie did the autograph shows. She'd show up and you could charge a fortune to sit there and sign autographs, and it's like $50 cash for, a half a second of their lives. She was very, very kind and talked to people, but it was, very much an industry. And here I am for 8 hours. I'll do this for 8 hours and I'm out of here. And that's an easy 10 grand cash for her,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you do one of those every couple of months or every quarter or whatever, and you have enough to survive on, then why wouldn't you?
Yeah. I mean, it did get, because I doubt that Kenny Baker got points. You know, he probably got like $500 a week the first time. And then, you know, as the movies went on and made more money, he got paid more money. But it was a sentimental pay because anyone could have been in that thing that was that little, you know? I mean, it sounds so dismissive, but he was the inside of a costume, like the robot in Lost in Space, you know? It's a guy. And that sounds really rude. I don't mean it that way. You know how I'm going with that, don't you? I mean, it would take some training. I'm not going to say it's just somebody goes in. Well, R2-D2, it was just. You know,
originally R2-D2 was supposed to walk. His three little legs were supposed to kind of shuffle. I guess kind of like if you've ever seen Interstellar, the little robot they have in that kind of does this thing. He was supposed to kind of
like that.
It was supposed to kind of lumber along, and then I think they realized it was just too difficult to make that work, and they had him roll instead.
Well, he does it a couple of times like at the ending of the throne room ending. He does walk up because everyone thought he was dead.
He has this like dance he does. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was all. You know, that was talking about. Yeah, that was all those emotional chords were brought out for that movie. Everyone was so into that. It was such a glorious ending to that movie. It really was.
So Kenny Baker passed away on August 13th, 2016. He had a lung condition for a long time. I think it had something to do with his death. He was 81 years old.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. R2-D2.
So, okay, I guess we talk about Alec Guinness.
Yeah, and I've got some small little characters we can mention, but yeah, let's Sir Alec Guinness, who originally was excited until he heard it was a science fiction movie, and then was unsure if he wanted to do it. Much like I think Anthony Daniels felt kind of the same way at first. Guinness was not sure he wanted to do a science fiction movie, but then when he read the script, he loved it, and he was a page turner. You know, kind of like what you've said about the story. He's like he wanted to turn the next page to see what happened next. He was really engrossed by it, and he had to read it a few times, just like everybody else did, till he really fully understood it. But he ended up accepting it. And I think Harrison Ford said he thinks that Alec Guinness took the part because Guinness saw it as a very American movie, as kind of like a Western, which, you know, it had a lot of connections to plot-wise. And so that's how he kind of saw it, and maybe that's why he jumped on board. Probably getting paid $15,000 a week in 1976 was probably another incentive.
Yeah,
and getting points on the film too.
He was the only one that was really a name in that movie. I mean, there's Peter Cushing, and he really panned the dialogue, didn't he? He always said, you hear so many different things. The only reason he wasn't going to do it, but then he saw American Graffiti and he liked George Lucas,
right?
So, but then you always hear that he really, you know, dismissed the dialogue and said it was hokey and he hated it. However, he got points. He made a lot of money off of that movie. Nobody knew it was going to make any money, so he made bank. I mean, that guy was rolling in it just from, I don't know, nobody got the image stuff, nobody got that merchandising stuff, but he got points from the gross of the movie, or is that net? I don't know what that means, but of the earnings of the movie, he got money. He got money.
So Sir Alec Guinness, he was an Oscar winner for The Bridge Over the River Kwai, of course, famous for Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago, and so and Lucas was against casting, for the most part, casting famous people in Star Wars, because he believed that if the audience recognized an actor, it would take them out of the fantasy of the film, right? He felt like if you put Robert Redford in your movie, now it's a Robert Redford movie. It's hard to imagine Robert Redford as not Robert Redford. So how do you imagine him, you know, as a swashbuckler in space? He just felt like it took it. And it was the other reason that George Lucas originally didn't want to cast anybody from American Graffiti, because, again, he didn't want people he saw in his last movie to be in this epic fantasy film that he was making. And then eventually, of course, he changed his mind because Harrison Ford was in American Graffiti, and he ended up auditioning several actors in addition, you know, Dreyfuss was another one that was in the running for Han Solo for a while, who was also in American Graffiti. So he eventually kind of changed his mind on that a little bit. But yeah, Sir Alec Guinness was the only real big star at that time, even though Carrie Fisher was famous. She hadn't really been in much of anything yet when she took on
only Shampoo, I think. But yeah, but Alec Guinness was Alec Guinness was huge in Britain but really ordinary looking. You know, he wasn't going to steal anybody's thunder. He was a kind, older looking gentleman who didn't need to do movies. You know, hugely successful on the stage. They put him up there with, you know, John Gielgud, and there's like three of those. Olivier. In fact, I think they were all friends. But you know, hugely successful on stage, Shakespearean actor, but not known enough to be, you know, a distraction. And he's really, Obi-Wan Kenobi is really not in it for all that long, is he? I mean, is he? I think a lot of it, the plot revolves around him so much. But is
You're
he?
right.
I guess he.
In the first movie, yes, and then he's voice only, obviously, for the most part.
Yeah.
He shows up as a Force ghost, you know, at certain points, but he's mainly just in Luke's head with voiceover for the rest of it.
Yeah.
So now we've talked about this before, how, you know, it became a common trope in Hollywood. Just like everybody said they were supposed to be at Sharon Tate's house the night of the murders, everybody tried to say they warned James Dean not to drive his car, that Porsche, that he was going to die if he kept racing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
George Stevens claimed to have told that story, and one of the people that claims to have told him this is Sir Alec Guinness. And this came out in an interview he did the same year, I believe, that Star Wars came out. He talked about, he claims that he met James Dean outside a restaurant in Hollywood, in LA area, about a week before James Dean died. And I think Alec Guinness had gotten into a fight with somebody or something, and he couldn't get back into the restaurant for some reason. And James Dean rolled up and said, "Hey, you know, I'm going in. Just come in with me." And so they went in together. But before they did, Alec Guinness said he checked out this Porsche that was in the parking lot, and he said it still had like the cellophane kind of wrapping on it, certain parts of it to, you know, protect the paint job and whatever. And he started talking to James Dean about this car, and he says that James Dean told him it could do a top speed of 150 miles an hour. And Guinness claims that he told James Dean, he said, if you drive this car within a week from this point, you'll be dead. He said it's now Thursday or, you know, Friday night at 10 p.m. By this time next week, you'll be dead, and he was. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I've listened to the actual audio of the interview, and he's very matter of fact about it, and he doesn't strike me as a guy who tells BS stories. So I don't know. I tend to believe it, I guess. I have no reason not to, even though I know a lot of people have said that they did warn him not to drive.
I think not. That's my guess. That's my. I don't think you know.
Happen, yeah.
He's an actor. He's probably someone that would dine out on a good story, and
sure.
And have a lot of people listen to him. Now, I'm not saying that an interaction didn't happen. But,
sure.
Maybe he saw and he goes, you're going to, that's a death trap or something like that. But
and that's kind of growing
it is now 10
yeah.
o'clock on Friday and within 7 days, that's what he's saying. And it's like, I don't think so. But, they might have had an interaction and it's possible. But, it just sounds like it's been embellished.
He claims they had a lovely evening at the restaurant, and he was very sad when it happened, like everybody else was. He said he wished he'd gotten to know him better, and than he lived. So, yeah. So, Alec Guinness passed away on August 5th, 2000, from liver cancer. He was 86.
He's the only one out of the cast that was nominated for the cast. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor that year. It won other Oscars. It won for, I think it was Special Achievement in Special Effects and Sound and Visual Effects. And it was nominated, and I believe John Williams was nominated and won for the score, Best Original Score. Oh my God, when I was in band in high school, we did the Star Wars theme. Could you imagine having to be a parent and listen to a high school band doing like a 15-minute orchestral version of Star Wars by like kids who aren't even into it, most of them? Oh my God, the agony that must have been.
I was in the marching band at Arizona State University, and we did a Star Wars show, but we were college kids. We were a little bit better, and we had 52 trumpets in our band, so it sounded pretty good. But yeah, in a high school orchestra, I can see it would be a little rough.
I would love to hear a recording of that. I really would. But you said so. Guinness had 2.25 interest in the revenue from it, and he said he had asked to confirm the additional 0.5 in writing, but was told it was reduced to 0.25. I'm not quite sure dialogue, because he'd been, sorry. But it was revealed in the 77 interview with Michael Parkinson that it was supported by many public comments. Mark Hamill, they were all speaking highly of him and his. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. He didn't quibble. He made a fortune. I think they said that he, if the film grossed something like $100 million, and he had, or $400 million, and he had 2% interest in the revenue,
which who knows after Hollywood accounting is taken into account how much actually made it to him, but. Probably a pretty good amount, because I'm sure they negotiated a good deal for him if he was, because everybody knows what Hollywood accounting is. They knew what it was back then. And it's not just getting a percentage, it's making sure you're high enough on the pecking order that you get it, that you get that money, that you're not so far down that it all gets sucked up by other, the Hollywood accounting is very famous for the shady accounting practices that they do. And you think you're in for 2%, but then you realize you're in for 2% of the remaining 10% that the studio doesn't take as a distribution fee after, all these other people. There's like a hierarchy to who gets their percentages first.
Interesting.
Basically.
Really interesting.
It's very, and there's a running joke in Hollywood that no movie has ever made money as far as Hollywood accounting is concerned. Yeah. They always find a way to say that it didn't make anything. So, but the casting was wild. Jodie Foster, at one point, was kind of in the lead to play Leia, but she was too young because she was 15. Terry Nunn, who went on to be the lead singer of Berlin, was in the lead, but she was also a minor. That is according to the definitive book, and she's talked about it. Yeah, she did, and Mark Hamill even commented that he saw her, because Mark Hamill didn't think he was going to get it either, but he knew she had auditioned, and he saw her collecting unemployment, like in the unemployment line, like a week after he had auditioned, and she's like, I didn't get it, and she's like, what about you? And he said, I didn't get it either, because he didn't think he did.
Okay, so she auditioned.
But Terry Nunn was she did. There's pictures of her, I believe, doing the audition, like in there with George and reading for it.
Okay.
Tons of people. Nick Nolte auditioned, Tommy Lee Jones, Travolta, Kurt Russell, Christopher Walken was favored to play Han at one point. He would have been a little bit older. But one of the reasons they went with Carrie Fisher is because, unlike Jodie Foster and Terry Nunn, Carrie Fisher was 18. And so you didn't have to worry about child labor laws filming, which you do when you work with minors. They can only work a certain number of hours a day. Whereas adults, you can kind of abuse more. That's why a lot of times child actors are twins, because then they can rotate the twin in and get a full day of filming out of the two.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah. Yep. But Carrie, she spent a lot of time in Britain anyway, so that's probably it didn't hurt things. But I just listened to the audiobook of Todd Fisher, who's her brother, Carrie Fisher's brother. Oh, sorry. Let's stay with Alec Guinness. Did we finish? We did finish him, didn't we?
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing about the casting process. When they started doing the casting, Brian De Palma and George Lucas were, and I guess assume still are, very good friends. And De Palma was casting for Carrie, the movie Carrie.
That's right. Yes.
And he pitched the idea of, well, we're both looking for kind of the same age group, and he already knows Lucas is doing this huge cattle call. He wants to see everybody. So De Palma's like, I'll just sit in with you, and we'll cast both films together. Yeah. And De Palma ended up casting most of his, the leads out of those sessions. And Lucas couldn't make his mind up, so eventually De Palma got bored with the process and, left it to Lucas to run the rest of the time. But, they sat together and cast for both Carrie and Star Wars, which then led to confusion for the actors because they didn't know what they were auditioning for. And De Palma was the better-known director at the time, so...
Carrie said that she thought that she was going to be doing Carrie. That's what she thought was going to, because she, Carrie doing Carrie, ha ha ha. But she thought that I think that's the part she thought she might get. So she was sort of surprised that she got Star Wars. But that audiobook was fascinating that Todd Fisher did. I was really surprised. I was expecting it to be, a lot of inserting yourself into situations. But they were really close, and it was a really interesting story. The two of them and Debbie Reynolds, they were all three of them close. But yeah, fascinating story. Those three, that family, Eddie Fisher and Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, and
yeah, I mean, Carrie Fisher was born into Hollywood royalty by by the very definition of it. She's the daughter of Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds. I mean, when she started, she was in addition to being an actress, she's a bit of a socialite. She liked to throw big parties in New York. And there's I think it may be an excerpt from her book, but I read it as an article. There's some great stories about her hanging out with the cast of SNL. And her friendship, her friendship with John Belushi, which kind of centered on their love of cocaine, their mutual love of cocaine, but also they were just good platonic friends. You know, Belushi was married the whole time, and I remember the SNL cast were in awe of Carrie Fisher, and why did she even want to hang out with them? Because she was Hollywood royalty, and they were just a bunch of dumb kids from Second City. They were just kind of like, oh wow, they were kind of starstruck by her, even though at this point they're like some of the biggest comedians in the country, because SNL is this big cultural phenomenon. So it's kind of funny to hear people kind of taking off with their own careers, but then Carrie Fisher rolls in, and it's like, oh, here's like the real starlet is among us.
Yeah. Yeah, she was. She certainly brought along a cachet with her just by her birthright, certainly. But she also earned her own way into pop culture. She was. I knew her, not like we weren't super friends, but I knew her fairly well, and from my time in England, and she was just exhausting to be around. Nice, but the bipolar stuff made her really difficult to be around. And she was like, you were just, this is, it was like, you couldn't follow it. And, but she was, like I say, she was super, super nice. And just as, throughout the one-liners, the bumper sticker one-liners, all the time, she always had some kind of remark to make. We were talking about drinking or something like that. She said, I'm not in AA. I'm just A or something like that, making a kind of just. But she also told me a really interesting anecdote, and I don't know what it even got started on, but she told me, she says, famous people, when you become famous, people don't want to talk to you anymore. I may have told you this before, or I might have mentioned it before. People don't want to talk to you anymore. They only want to listen to you. So you can go up to somebody and go, I love you, and then you can start spouting out, and you could talk about anything. You could say, I had the shittiest day, da-de-da, and people, the fans will just go, leaning on your every word and smile and giggle and titter because they want to please
at every
you.
Joke and
then she said that's why celebrities have this distorted view of what they have to say is important to other people, because people give them that power. And it was interesting to get that anecdote, because she saw it from all around, and she knew that she was born into an odd situation, and she struggled with bipolar and drug addiction and her relationship with her parents, etc. But she was able to parlay that into that career of being this writer that was pretty funny, pretty good stuff.
She was a fantastic author. She wrote Postcards from the Edge. It was started out, she wrote it as a book, kind of semi-autobiographical, which then of course got made into the movie. She was also a script doctor in Hollywood, which if you don't know what a script doctor is, people listening, you're usually an uncredited role. You're brought in to punch up a script. To help. Sometimes you're brought in to write. It could be as simple as, we want you to punch up the dialogue for this specific character, right? Or it might be the whole script we want you to look at, or whatever. But a script doctor, it's their job to come in and kind of fine tune a script. And she supposedly worked as a script doctor on Hook for Spielberg, Sister Act, The Wedding Singer, Lethal Weapon 3, and I believe she also did some script doctor work on some of the prequel Star Wars movies. Which she probably was happy to not get credited for.
But she was also, she said that she is the most successful actress in Hollywood. And I was like, well, what do you mean? She says, well, I have been in so many blockbusters. I may have had just a cameo in them, but I was in, When Harry Met Sally, I was in Star Wars, and I was in Charlie's Angels. I was in, she was in all these hit movies. That by box office standards, she was the most successful financial actress of all time at that time.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
She was also in The Burbs. It's one of my favorites that she was in. She played Tom
Wow.
Hanks's wife. Remember, who she's not in it a whole bunch because she leaves with the kids at a certain point once his antics get out of control. But yeah, she's funny in it.
Was it? Oh, that we talked about that in The Wizard of Oz. That the Oz movie that they did with the dwarves, and she was Chevy Chase, and that was with Chevy Chase, and they were making The Wizard of Oz. That we talked about that during the Wizard of Oz episode. It was Under the Rainbow, and it was all about the Munchkins filming the Wizard of Oz. At the Culver Hotel, and they were swinging from the rafters, and it's a terrible, terrible movie. But yeah, she's done some clunkers, that's for sure. But
who hasn't?
Amazing writer.
So you mentioned her bipolar. So the one story I have about Carrie Fisher, I never met her, but I was shopping a couple of years ago. I was in a clothing store, and the person working at the clerk working at the store, we started talking, and somehow maybe it was a few years ago. Maybe Carrie Fisher just died. I don't remember, but she but this worker said that they had previously worked at another big clothing store in LA that's very well known, and when they worked there at the time, it was kind of famous. The store was open till midnight. That was kind of one of their things that they were known for. It was this kind of high-end clothing store, and they were open till midnight. And they said that Carrie Fisher used to come in and shop at she'd come in at 11:30 midnight or so, and they'd keep the store open later for her because they know she was going to buy a lot. But they said they felt kind of bad because it was obvious that Carrie was kind of having a manic episode a lot of times when she was coming in and buying all these clothes, and they're like, I don't know if we should be selling her all this. But then they're like, well, she'll probably come back tomorrow or the next day and return whatever she doesn't like when she kind of comes back down again. But they said she never did. She never returned anything. She would come in and just buy a ton of stuff and be in this super positive kind of manic mode, and apparently just kept it.
Yeah, and she never wore shoes. It used to make me nuts. 30 feet, and she always put them on. She always put them on the chair, always put them on the sofa, and it was like, I just have a thing about feet anyway. But it was just always. It was
And you're credited in a Tarantino movie, and you have a thing against feet.
I know, right? No, I think feet are. I don't want to see other people's feet now. And but anyway, she was. I liked her a lot. She was really nice. And just difficult to be around sometimes, and just funny. The book that Todd Fisher wrote was really interesting. How they had went to see the first screening of Star Wars, the first New Hope, and that was at Fox. It was like an advanced screening, and they kind of snuck in when the credits, and she was like scared to death because it was all this hoopla on the Fox. They all were. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And by the time the movie goes over with, they're all sitting here with their mouths wide open, going, "What did we just watch? This is incredible."
Right.
So she definitely learned how to embrace it. But and I do think they got some kind of profit sharing somehow, but not the marketing. And she would always make cracks about stuff like that, because she would bring out. On talk shows, she would bring out toys of her, and she made those Pez dispensers, and she was, look at this, you can snap my neck back, and then candy comes out of my throat.
She did that great speech, that roasting of George Lucas when he got the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award. And if you haven't seen it, everybody listening, you should. It's on YouTube. It's amazing. And she goes into that. She says that she can't look at herself in the mirror without sending George a couple of bucks. Because he owns her likeness. And she mentioned the Pez dispenser, that her daughter, whenever her daughter would get mad at her, she'd break out the Pez dispenser and pull candy out of her throat. And then she said, or the shampoo bottle where you twisted my head off and poured soap out of my neck. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how George Lucas wouldn't let her wear a bra underneath, like the famous metal bikini and all the other outfits she wore. She wasn't allowed to wear a bra because George Lucas told her there was no underwear in space.
Okay. Right, but all the other characters had cod pieces, though. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's funny, but she got a lot of flack for the hairdo, and I don't know if there was ever any if there was ever any regret on George Lucas's part for that, the hair and her
for the cinnamon bun buns on the side of her head. Yeah.
But she knew how to get a joke out of everything, and I've seen it on a dozen shows. But she makes me laugh every time because she says, when someone, on the Ellen DeGeneres show, when she did her the first sitcom, Carrie Fisher, played just a quick cameo in this bookstore as herself, and Ellen grabs the buns and look, I'm Princess Leia, and she goes, as many times as I see that, I never get tired of it. She was always, it makes me laugh every time. I never get sick of it, and. But yeah, it's just the Blues Brothers, another highest grossing movie. She was just in so much stuff, and that's how I think she hooked up with all of that Saturday Night Live clan.
Well, supposedly, I read that she said that, back she was friends with Aykroyd and Belushi in the SNL cast, and when she did, when she was agreed to be in Blues Brothers, supposedly the agreement was that Belushi, John, and Dan Aykroyd would get to play like aliens or some type of creature in the next Star Wars movie, and George Lucas was like, no. So she pitched it to him.
No, it's funny.
No. But she was still in Blues Brothers, obviously, as the mystery woman.
I just remember there was a guy I knew, a comic. He's probably still around. His name was Scott Capurro, and another comic I knew named Greg Proops. And both of those guys were hired to be sportscasters in one of the Star Wars movies. I forget which one it was, but there were two sportscasters that were, aliens or whatever, but they were celebrity voices, and it was these two guys. I just remember that. I forgot about that.
It was probably the prequel where they had the pod racing. It was like a Ben-Hur type of chariot race, but they called pod racers. That's the only thing I can think of where they might have had that kind of character. I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, it started getting a bit silly when they do the Jar Jar Binks business, and I really. God.
The biggest problem I have with the Star Wars, the original trilogy, is that they won't give us the original version pre-90s when they went in and did all the really what's now extremely dated CGI from the 90s, which they went in and added to the original trilogy. So because George Lucas wanted it to match up better with the prequels that he was about to come out with. So they added all types of little alien creatures into things. They added scenes. Yeah. There's now a whole song and dance sequence in it that's just terrible. And there's a really bad, they put in a deleted scene where Han Solo talks to is in Jabba the hangar and he talks to Jabba the Hutt, and but they hadn't designed the Jabba the Hutt creature yet at the time, so they didn't realize he's going to have a tail. So there's a moment where Han Solo is supposed to walk behind him, but they realize he can't walk behind him because there's a big tail there. So they did this. It's awful. This like digital. They make Harrison Ford kind of pop up and back down again as he's walking, like to show he's stepping up. It looks like I did it and I don't know how to do it. Like that, it looks so I can't. It looks so bad. I can't believe they were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's put it out there. I really cannot believe that they approved that. It looks so bad. The fans they want so badly to have the original trilogy unmessed with. And granted, there were other tweaks that were made through various releases, little things that were done to it, in the years before they did the big thing in the 90s. But give me like the digitally cleaned up, fine, remastered, but original. Call it Star Wars Classic, call it whatever you want. I know George Lucas is completely dead set against it, releasing that. And I don't know if Disney, as part of their deal when they acquired the thing, agreed to never ever release the original versions of the film. But it really sucks that we can't get that. I can't get a 4K or Blu-ray copy of the original trilogy before they mess with it. It like bums me out.
I mean, Disney, I can't imagine them not having that in the deal. Right. When they run out of making more Star Wars movies, they'll just reissue them all.
Go back and repackage.
And you're right, like classic version and stuff.
Call it whatever Star Wars Vintage or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you go into the there's so many things that were so advanced in that movie. But then when you go to the cantina, some of those are really bad. You know, those costume characters, they were like, you know, just mannequin heads. They didn't have any moving parts. No, you know, a lot of them were just not.
That's where it's because the studio cut down on their pre-production time, and that just ended up costing them later. Is they said they ended up costing them twice as much to shoot some of these things because they wouldn't let them have a skeleton crew through an extra 6 weeks of pre-pro to get things like the alien costumes perfect and fine-tuned. And so there are moments in it where the seams show a little bit where you realize, oh, this was rushed. It's amazing that it looks as good as it does, but there's still some moments that don't look, you know.
Have you been to that Cantina bar on Hollywood Boulevard?
I haven't, no.
It's on the same block as the Vine Street Cinema. And
really?
It's made to look like the cantina, and it's got you know, all the rocks and everything, and the drinks were these really bizarre looking concoctions and the most awful drinks you'll ever imagine. But the guys are dressed like the bartender in the cantina, and it's interesting. You know, it was like the Beetlejuice bar they had going for a while. But it's still, you know, I don't know if they're going to open it again after this business, but it's right there on Hollywood and Vine, practically.
Do you have any other Carrie Fisher stories? In what context did you meet her? Was it during your ex's show that you met her, or when? Was it?
When we were together, he wanted to meet her. He wanted to be friends with her. That's what he wanted. I mean, that was way before he even had a show. He's like, I want to know her. I want to be friends with her. So when he started the ball rolling, he got her on as a guest, and they hit it off. So we saw each other socially several times. So like I said, I want to misrepresent it as being friends, like we called each other. I mean, she called the house, but it was like, I want to talk to, you know, the other one, you know, so it wasn't like we talked a whole lot, you know. We ended up in the green room at, you know, a couple of different things and ended up having conversations, but it was, you know, we weren't friends. So, but she was funny for certain. Absolutely funny. Actually, one of the last things she did was my ex's show in London.
Oh, wow.
The last interview she did was that.
I knew she was on a flight coming back from London. I didn't realize that. Yeah, that's one of the things she did.
She did his show, and then she did another quick game show, and then she was on the plane back when she had the heart attack.
Yeah, so it was December 23rd, 2016, flight from London to L.A., and she suffered what was described as a medical emergency on the flight. And then, but she survived, but then passed away 4 days later, at the age of, I believe, 60. She was 60.
And Todd, her brother was saying that she, you know, there was a while where they really thought she might pull through, although she'd been out for her heart attack for like 10 minutes. So the odds of them getting her out with little, you know, damage, were not that great. But they, you know, of course you hold hope, but eventually that wasn't going to happen, and she ended up passing away. And then, bizarrely, you know, her mother died like the next day. And it was the most bizarre thing.
That's crazy. Yeah, Debbie Reynolds, her mother, suffered a stroke on December 28th. So the following day, suffered a stroke and was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai, and I believe. Carrie's brother was the one that said that shortly before Debbie Reynolds died, she said, "I want to be with Carrie." Yeah, and that he believed that Carrie passing at least was a contributing factor to the stroke that it hit her mom so hard.
You know, I thought that was going to be BS when I read those quotes, but listening to his entire 14-hour book, I believe it. And he's not representing himself differently than he was there. He remembers it, and he believed it, that was what it was. These were his two closest people in his life, and they didn't want to live with these kids. Debbie, they had a strained relationship a lot of times, but she was extremely protective of Carrie and had a special, you know, probably her favorite, I guess. And it was wild, the joint funeral with the whole at the forest lawn, and Carrie's buried in the Prozac bottle or whatever, Prozac pill.
Yeah, so she supposedly some of her ashes are buried next to her mother in forest lawn, and then the rest are in an urn that's shaped like a giant Prozac pill, which you can see. There's
the Prozac pill is with her mother. Yeah.
Oh, is that the one that's with her? Okay.
Yeah, because that was like her cookie jar or something at home, and then when they were looking for an urn for her, Todd was like, Billy too, the daughter,
Billy Lord. I think they thought that she would have thought it was funny, and I think they're probably right.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you ever see pictures of her house, it is a freaking madhouse. Right. Yeah, and Billy, they were going to sell the house, but Billy decided to keep the house, and they're redoing it, and they had that auction of all her stuff, a lot of her stuff, and Debbie's stuff, because Debbie, saved those costumes, and Debbie. Oh man, somebody deserves to be haunted by the ghost of Debbie Reynolds, because the lengths that she went to save and preserve Hollywood costumes. And back in the 70s when no one was doing it, and she's she got Marilyn's 7-year itch dress, and she's got the Singing in the Rain business, and she's got all these costumes. And this person said they were going to help him. George Lucas said no. Steven Spielberg said no. Sell this stuff. I suggest you sell it. These people, they were going to do this deal and have it here. It fell through. And, finally she's like, screw it. I'm old. I need the money, and we're getting rid of it. So all those costumes are out into the world because no one would give her freaking museum. And that just blows.
And now, ironically, there is an Academy Museum that Steven Spielberg contributed many millions of dollars to.
And now, I guess, Todd, according to Todd, he said that he was going to give them some of the Debbie costumes that they didn't get rid of. And he says, I will only give these to you if you call it the Debbie Reynolds wing. Or something, to them in the Academy. Yes. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but I know that was spoken. So, and I hope so. She really got, God, she got screwed. And if you do that story of Debbie Reynolds and those costumes, it's criminal what they did not do for that heritage of that entire town, of that entire industry. And, she had like the original camera that was used in Gone with the Wind. She saved everything. She bought everything. She went broke buying this stuff. And Carrie, they had a struggle of life, the two of them together. But Carrie was a big proponent of that too, trying to get things off the ground to get that museum done for her mother. And Todd was the man who took care of all those things. I don't know, it just is really sad. And that woman got screwed over, I think. But anyway. And speaking of people that got screwed over, so Carrie passed away, and she's buried in a Prozac pill, giant Prozac pill.
Which you can find pictures of online, of her brother carrying it at the memorial service. It's like the size of a football.
Yes. I was going to say that in the Grammys, was up for Best Album of the Year. It's the Star Wars soundtrack. And they lost. Oh, right. They lost to Fleetwood Mac Rumors. That's the one that won Album of the Year. And, which is, interesting. And you know what else happened in that ceremony? Best newcomer of the Grammys that year. They were up for the Cars were up for it for best newcomer. They lost over a group called A Taste of Honey. Now, do you remember A Taste of Honey?
I think I might remember the name, but not really.
It's a disco song called Boogie Oogie Oogie Till You Just Can't Boogie No More. And that is what the Cars, as best newcomer, lost out to that in the Grammy.
Swing and a miss.
That is something that's always really bugged me, and I always wanted to say that out loud because it really always bothered me a great deal. But anyway,
the reason that John Williams did the Star Wars score, was asked to do it, is because of another film we've talked about. It's because of Jaws. And Jaws had come out the year before they went into production on... in fact, I think Jaws was in post-production while they were in pre-production on Star Wars, or maybe something like that. They were still in development, because Star Wars was in development for a couple of years. But regardless, George Lucas, of course, was friends with Spielberg and heard the score and liked it. And Spielberg was really enthusiastic, like, oh, you got to meet this guy, John Williams. He's great. And he does classical style orchestration, which is what Lucas wanted. He wanted a big classical score, and the rest is history. And
John Williams did the Lost in Space theme song on TV, and he did Valley of the Dolls. He was around. He was Johnny Williams for Valley of the Dolls in the credits. And then, he went on, of course, Raiders and Superman. And I saw a video on YouTube recently where there were these two guys. I think one of them had a trombone and one of them had a trumpet. And they stood in front of John Williams' house and started playing the Star Wars. Did you see that?
He came out.
Yeah, I don't know if he did come out something, but it was a great
he
video.
Came out. He came out and talked to them. He was really nice to them. It was really cool. And I don't know if that was a really planned thing or if it just happens that he was home and came out. And he talked to him. It was really nice. Hold on one second. I found this. I think it was in my mom's records or possibly in our friend Kelly's record collection. I can't remember which, but it is Dionne Warwick in Valley of the Dolls vinyl.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
That's beautiful.
The girl who made Alfie has done it again with the theme from Valley of the Dolls. So
she's great. She's great.
She's got some. Do you want it?
I'll take it. Oh my God!
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have that. That'd be great.
I will put. If you don't have this, I will put it in your collection.
Yeah. Awesome. So I just want to quickly. There's a couple of other people I just want to shout out. So there was Sheila Fraser. Sheila Fraser was Aunt Beru, who was adopted his Luke Skywalker. She was 57 when they made the movie. They wanted to hire someone who had a little British accent. She was actually born in Australia. Huge on the stage, and also did a lot of Hammer films. Again, she was another person that did the Hammer horror films, the Body Stealers, and etc. But she died at the age of 77. In 2000. Phil Brown played Uncle Owen, who was 61 when they made the movie.
And he's an interesting backstory. He was blacklisted during the McCarthy era.
Yeah, and he took off to London.
He was born in Massachusetts, and he was never a part of the Communist Party or anything, but it was guilt by association. He was in, I think, an actors group that was that they suspected. So he got blacklisted in 1952, and he fled to England. And the reason he got the part is he's from Massachusetts, and George Lucas wanted an actor with a kind of ironic, kind of funny that Fraser needed to be a British accent, but he wanted Uncle Owen to have a heavy American accent. And here's this American from Massachusetts who's living in England where they're filming, so he got the part.
Yeah, I wonder what the reasoning was for that, because obviously there was.
Right.
That she should have a British accent and he had an American one. Nothing is done accidentally. So, I wonder what that was.
And he said that they wanted to cast a curmudgeon, and he was naturally a curmudgeon, so it was easy for him to play the role.
Yeah.
He passed away on February 9th, 2006 from pneumonia. He was 89.
He was in Chaplin, too, wasn't he? He was a projectionist in Chaplin.
Was he? I just watched that again like 2 days ago. I didn't even... Because I know Duchovny was the camera operator for like the Max Sennett stuff and some of the other films that they had him do. I didn't... Yeah. Man, now I got to watch it again so I can find Uncle Owen.
But yeah, he came back to America and he was doing the conventions. He loved it. He was eating it up, So he really enjoyed the notoriety. Not bad for a probably 3-minute screen time,
right,
at the most. So good for him.
But he had a name, and he wasn't covered up by a mask, so it was his face that you see on screen. So I can see, it's Uncle Owen. Everybody would recognize him. Yeah, I could see how it would. Yeah,
and Aunt Beru with the blue milk.
Right.
But, and then the last one was that Jack Purvis guy. I didn't know he was Kenny Baker's friend, but he was the chief Jawa and he died in Hertfordshire, in England, in 1997. So Jawas. Now there was another one I thought was a pretty weak special effect with the Jawa's eyes.
They were like they looked like flashlights, basically.
Yeah, that was bad. That was bad. So I don't know if he touched those up. I only saw that updated version once. It's been many years since I used to have the 8mm black and white, little 3-minute roll of Star Wars. I probably still have it somewhere. And but it was interesting because how do you put a full-length movie into an 8mm black and white thing, with subtitles, because there was no sound. And but you could really see, I remember seeing the TIE fighters, and how the TIE fighters would spin when they were on. You could see how in black and white, you could see the different cuts and how they edited it together. Fox was just throwing stuff out there, just making anything they could for marketing. I mean, they just they didn't care. I mean, they were just throwing it out there. But yeah,
and
I think I still have it. I must.
Do you know what TIE stood for?
No.
Twin Ion Engine. Twin
Okay.
Ion Engine. So there you go. There's a bit of that's why TIE Fighter, and that's why it's always spelled capital T, capital I, capital E, because it's initials for something. Yeah, it's an abbreviation.
Interesting.
Yep.
Wow. There's so many. Yeah, just yeah, it was iconic. That movie was. It meant a lot to me when it came out, and I loved it. I loved it, and obviously it still has staying power. We're still talking about it. You know, it's still referenced all the time. When Carrie and those guys were brought on as, I think they called them legacy performers when they were coming in for the last batch of Star Wars movies.
Yeah,
bringing the three of them back. And the other guys that were in costumes.
The only thing that disappointed me was that they never had the three of them together again. They reunited. There was a scene with Han and Leia together where they kind of reunite, and then there's a scene in the second film with Leia and Luke together. But they never put the three of them together, and they weren't going to, because they killed Han in the first film, in the first of the new films. So I thought, well, maybe they were planning on finally putting them together in the third film, but then Carrie Fisher died before they made the third film, and that screwed up their plans. But they had killed Han Solo off in the first one, so he wasn't, unless he was going to somehow come back as a Force ghost.
Well, didn't you say that some of them were? Didn't they CGI him back to be younger before the first movie? I mean, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could have always. I don't know. I mean, they killed Han off in the first episode, and you don't see Luke until the last shot of that movie. So that was for whatever reason, I don't know why, they just were never going to put the three of them together on screen, even though you got them all to come back. And I think it's kind of what everybody was waiting for.
Isn't that funny? And Disney is always about that sort of manipulating emotion. So you'd have thought, because there was all that hype of the three of them coming back. And I'm sort of surprised that Disney didn't do that. But or maybe they did.
I don't want to be a toxic. I don't want to be a toxic fan or whatever and get into the nitty gritty of that. But that was the one thing that stood out to me as a disappointment.
But Disney, you know what? They're not stupid. They probably do have that footage somewhere. They're just going to redo it. Re-release it as the.
Right.
I'll bet you. Maybe in another 10, 20 years. But I'll bet you, because Lucas, Disney. They sold it. I couldn't tell you for how much, but Lucas sold it to them, and they already made it back, like in the first movie. It was in the several billions of dollars, I believe, that they paid for it. Yeah, but they made that back in the first of the the last batch that they did.
It was a good investment.
And Lucas hates them because they're doing things with characters. So Disney. Yeah, they're not stupid. They got all that stuff in the can. I'll bet you we'll see it.
Yeah. Oh, you bought the 4K disc set for $100? Well, guess what? You didn't get all of it.
No.
There's the super special edition. I'll buy it. No, honestly, dude, if they put the original trilogy unmessed with on 4K disc, I would pay very good money. I would pay premium money to own a copy of that, because it sucks that I have a copy that I basically have to fast forward the stuff I don't like whenever I watch it. It just kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff they messed with before they did the big 90s thing was like they kept tweaking the hologram with Leia when she does the help me Obi-Wan, you're my only hope thing.
Yeah.
That the R2 unit plays. They kept messing with that effect for some reason. At one point they added scan lines to it, and it seemed like every time they came out with they re-released the film, and they did something new to that. And I don't know why they took issue with how that effect was done. I thought it was fine, the old versions that I saw of it. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm saying this, and I literally just spent the last year updating one of my own films. And adding a bunch of stuff into it and redoing the color grade and stuff.
Yeah,
so I get.
You kind of overanalyze. I get that.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about something that several millions of people are into, you're kind of it's like mustache on the Mona Lisa kind of thing. You got to be really careful. You don't distract from what the original intention was.
Yeah.
It's just interesting how Carrie Fisher, her in that, tied up in the slave girl thing. Oh my God, that's like iconic. That's like a lot of young men's first thing was seeing Carrie Fisher
as the bikini, chained to a slug.
That is, that turned it. I was surprised at how iconic that became. how many people attribute that to their first crush, we'll say.
And there's great behind-the-scenes photos of her and her double laying and sunning themselves in the desert between takes, lounging. And I think
with
they're
those
both
costumes
wearing,
on?
I think they're both in the costumes. They're definitely. I think they're both definitely skimpily clothed in this in the sunbathing shot. I think they're in those costumes, but I can't remember. But yeah, yep.
Cool.
All right, did we do it? Did we do Star Wars?
I think we did. Yeah, that was it was a lot of, that was really interesting. I found that fascinating. I
did too.
Not in a way that, it's really interesting about me, Mike. I don't mean it like that.
I'm like an actor. I just like people to hear me talk.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that was fun. Thanks. That was cool.
Thank you, guys. We will see you guys next time. And we, again, check out our Patreon if you haven't already, Dearly Departed Podcast on Patreon. And also we do, if you only listen to the audio versions of this, we also do a video version that we release usually a couple days after the audio version on Scott's YouTube channel, which is...
now it's Dearly Departed with Scott Michaels.
Do you think I froze? Sorry. So it's Dearly Departed with Scott Michaels is the name of the channel on YouTube. Yeah, check it out. You got how many? You got like 60,000 followers and subscribers now. Some crazy amount. 70,000. Yes, that's awesome. So and Scott puts up all kinds of extra content. He went through. Was it Rock Hudson's Rolodex that you recently did? Yes.
Yeah. And
that's cool.
Did you see I had that opened up? I had that Ted Cassidy life mask. Lurch from the Addams Family. Oh my God! It's like this. It's massive. That was one I did fairly recently too. So check out Dearly Departed with Scott Michaels on YouTube while you're at it, and we will see you. We are going to make it out of the 27 Club. We will see you with episode 28 in a few weeks. May the Force be with you always.
Yes.
This has been an episode of the Dearly Departed Podcast. Dig up more episodes at dearlydepartedpod.com and on iTunes and Google Play. See you next time.